Good day, everyone. I am Brian Gabriel, and I welcome you to my presentation, Steamboats on the Lower Chippewa River, Wisconsin. In 2005, my son Evan and I began exploring and documenting the history of the Lower Chippewa River. This led to us accumulating many vintage pictures, doing presentations, conducting interviews, and producing numerous videos. The cover slide you see before you is of the Phil Shekel passing through Durand with a lumber raft. Also note the swing bridge, which allows the steamboat to pass through. Now this picture was taken about 1890 after the first bridge at Durand was constructed in 1884. Next, let's take a virtual trip up the Chippewa River, and we'll be starting from Wabasha, Minnesota. And here would be Nelson, Wisconsin, Highway 25, the Mississippi River. Reed's Landing would be right in here, and this is where the Chippewa River flows into the Mississippi, right here. And upstream we would have Pepin, Wisconsin, and then Lake Pepin farther up. Proceeding up the Chippewa River, you'll notice that we have these sandbars in the river, and as we go up farther, we'll see more of them, and this has been a big problem with the Chippewa River over the years. The first notable landmark will be the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Bridge, and next would be the Highway 35 bridge. On the left side of the Chippewa River, you'll see the bluffs of Pepin County. Here is Buffalo County and the Tiffany Wildlife Refuge. Here is Battle Island, the scene of a fierce battle between the Chippewa and Sioux Indians. Also notice that we still have the sandbars in the river making their way down to the Mississippi. You can see the beautiful bluffs here along the Pepin County side. Plum Creek enters the Chippewa River right in here. Next, we come to Mark's Landing, or the present day Ella. This is along County Highway N from Arkansas to Pepin. If you ever want a scenic drive, don't miss out on this one. Across from Ella is the entrance to the Little Beef Slough. Our next stop will be Dead Lake. This was a steamboat port Rafting crews would stop here overnight on their way upriver, and in later years it was kind of a resort area, good fishing here, and there was a hotel, the Eau Claire House. You'll see County Highway N again. And up toward the north, there used to be a cutoff here where the steamboats could actually come in through here and all the way around. Again, you'll see these numerous sandbars in the river. Approaching Durand upriver, we are coming to the to Round Hill right here, and across from Round Hill are the dripping rocks along Highway 25 here, and this is the entrance to the Big Beef Slough. Here is Durand, right on the Chippewa River. It was a major point of activity for the steamboats in the early days before the railroad came through. Upstream from present-day Durand is where Bear Creek enters the river, and this was the site of the original Durand. This is the location of Old Wabeek. This is 9 Mile Island, and this is the 9 Mile Island Slough. The main channel of the Chippewa proceeds this direction, and the 9 Mile Island was noted for its huge numbers of passenger pigeons until they became extinct. Old Wabeek was the home of Phil Shekel, probably the most famous steamboat boatman on the Chippewa River. This is the upper part of 9 Mile Island. Again, you can see the slough, and it was an interesting occurrence a few years ago when a large wooden object was found up here in the northern part and was determined to be an old part of an old steamboat dock, actually, and I'll have more to talk about that later. Here is the site of Dunville, where Phil Shekel made his daily trips to pick up lumber rafts. This is the Red Cedar River, and a little farther upstream is the big railroad bridge, which now carries the Red Cedar River Bike Trail and the Chippewa River Bike Trail crossing. So you can take the Chippewa River Bike Trail all the way to Durand from here and go up the Red Cedar Bike Trail to Menominee. Proceeding up north on the Chippewa River Trail, you'll be able to go to Eau Claire. This is a better view of the Red Cedar River coming into the Chippewa and the railroad, the old railroad bridge. This is the site of Old Tyrone, which was a steamboat stop at one time. And we will be proceeding upriver, coming to the Merdine Islands. We are now at the site of the Merdine Islands. There are 5 of them, and this first one is the Fairplay Island, and there was an early steamboat port here, and also the Fairplay Ferry ran across here, and this actually was our farm for 50 years. Notice that we are quite close to the river, and sometimes the river got quite close to us. This is Chippewa Island, and it is a privately owned island. New Merdine was right here, and the Merdine ferry used to cross at this point and go up and cross the island and then up over to Springbrook Township. Pasture Island was just exactly what the name says, just a place for people to put their cattle to graze. And as I mentioned before, this was the main channel at one time. And before that, of course, Rumsey's Landing was up in here. This was the main channel. So these islands are moving all the time. This is Happy Island, and at one time it supported 8 farms. Old Merdine was located here along with the sawmill. Also, there was the middle ferry that crossed right in this area. This island was depopulated in 1944 and turned into a forestry plantation. Right next to it is Brush Island, unoccupied, and probably used mostly for pasturing cattle again. This you can see here is the Merdine Slough. Sevastopol, located in this area, was a wannabe steamboat port, but it never materialized. This is where Rock Creek enters the Chippewa River. Here is the site of the historic Caryville Ferry, which closed operations in 1964. It was last run by the Elf family. This is County H. This is present-day Caryville, which originated as a railroad town. This is Highway 85, and this is the way to Eau Claire. Beyond Caryville is Powell Lake, which is being rehabilitated by the DNR and the Lower Chippewa River Alliance folks. On this curve of the river is where Elk Creek enters the Chippewa. Now if you notice this white area here, that is a high sand bank, or a yellow bank they used to call it. And that is where there's probably still some sedimentation and sand coming into the Chippewa River from this raw bank. Next, we come to Porterville or Porter's Mills. This was the site of a prosperous village and sawmill, along with being a major steamboat stop. Since its closing, it has become a source of sand and gravel for the Eau Claire area. Approaching Eau Claire, we have three major steamboat docks. The first one was at Shawtown, and the second one is just off of Water Street. This is a little better look at the west side or the Water Street landing. It's in here, and this is Half Moon Lake, which was full of logs and sawmills in the area. This is the Eau Claire River. Here is a look at the third major steamboat landing in Eau Claire, and this one they called the East Side Levee. It's at the end of Gray Street, just above the Lake Street Bridge. Also, you can see the Dell's Pond, which was a terrific holding area for logs to supply the sawmills in Eau Claire. And again, here is the Eau Claire River coming into the Chippewa. And that ends our virtual flyover of the lower Chippewa River. This is a map of our just completed flyover. As you can see, we travel here from Reed's Landing all the way up to Eau Claire. This distance is about 55 miles by river. Steamboats provided more timely, low-cost commercial and passenger transportation in and out of the Chippewa Valley. Evolution of Chippewa River transportation. Of course, we have the old reliable birch bark canoe, the dugout canoe, John Russell from Menominee made a drawing of another form of transportation, the Mackinaw. You can see that it's holding quite a bit of supplies and cargo, and we'd have about, let's see, 4 or 5 men to run it. So it was looks like a pretty good craft on going downstream anyway. The keelboat could haul up to 25 tons. And again, it was a pretty laborious process because it took a lot of men to run this, especially going upstream. That was the hardest part. earliest documented steamboat coming up the Chippewa River was the Dr. Franklin in 1848. So this was the start of the steamboat era on the lower Chippewa River, which lasted from that time until about 1900. Let's take a little look at steamboats in general. Some parts of a steamboat that are pretty interesting are the stage in the front here, which was able to swing 180 degrees left or right and could dock at any side of the steamboat that it wanted to. Also, the pilot house is where Mark Twain learned how to be a Mississippi River pilot. And also, this would be the stern drive wheel which propelled the steamboat. And we'll show you some more examples of that. This is a very early picture of a lumber raft from 1870. And this was at Eau Claire. And here's the Eau Claire River. And you can see that they are assembling this raft as shown here, moving the smaller pieces in to make a bigger one. Also, it took a man on each one of these steering oars to keep it in the river. Now, lumber rafts contained dimensional lumber, lath, shingles, and pickets. Here is another lumber raft. This time it's at Reed's Landing. Here is a picture of a lumber raft from 1870 assembled by the Knapp Stout Company at Reed's Landing. The Chippewa River is entering the Mississippi right in here. And this is the steamboat Annie Gurdon. Notice again all the oarsmen that were needed to steer the raft down the Mississippi River. And I have some statistics about this raft, which is just absolutely huge. Anyway, it had 1,835,000 board feet of lumber, 77,000 shingles, 610,500 lath, 6,000 pickets, and was 4 acres in area. The other type of raft was the log raft, which you see before you right now. If you notice and you look closely, you can see there's individual logs in this raft. And these were sometimes sent downriver to sawmills along the Mississippi River and sold. Here is a picture of the Red Wing unloading freight at Maiden Rock, Wisconsin, because steamboats were used for hauling freight and passengers. Here is a cargo on a steamboat, the Minnie Heerman. And what we have here are sacks of wheat, rye, barley. Let's see, we have some barrel of apples, prunes, beans, etc. Just an example of what they would carry. This is from 1881. Also, carrying passengers was important to the steamboats, and some of the passengers that they would carry were the raftsmen who went from Eau Claire to Reed's Landing, but they had to get back to Eau Claire. So here we have Nelson Burdett crew, 7 men at $3.50 apiece, or $24.50. And we have Frank Vervet. He also had 7 men. And Joe Crowley had 7 men. So you can see the income that the steamboat derived from hauling raftsmen back up the river. And also they would take on individual passengers. Here's a W.A. Bingham from Durand. He was going from Eau Claire to Reed's Landing for $3.50. And there were, let's see, Ole Torgerson went from Durand to Reed's Landing, I think, for $2. And there was a Benedict here from Durand to Reed's for also $2. Here's the Helen Mar. This is could have been what they just offloaded. There's barrels there, the type of freight that the steamboats would haul, because barrels were easy to move. That's why they were round and quite common in the day. The Red Wing was quite an excursion vessel. They did a lot of sightseeing on the Mississippi, even on the Chippewa River. And this is the Red Wing in the back, and this is the big barge in front, which is called an excursion barge, or the Manitou. Here's a passenger coming off the boat, must have just landed. Here's another view of the Red Wing with the Manitou in front. Must have been a pleasant way to pass the time on weekends and holidays. Here's the Luella. This is a stern wheeler. And this is at Reed's Landing. There were also side wheelers, and I'll show you a few of those. This is the Clyde. It has 2 wheels in the back for propulsion. And here are some manufactured goods brought in, probably to the upper Midwest. And this is like some sort of a cultivator and a plow. So that was another important function of steamboats. Here is a side wheeler, the Champion, also at Reed's Landing. The St. Croix, a stern wheeler, probably named after the area where it worked probably the most, up in the St. Croix River. Let's visit some steamboat ports. This is at Reed's Landing in 1872. where there are several steamboats, rafters they call them, are tied up for winter quarters. They were not able to operate during the winter because of ice conditions. This is another nice view of Reed's Landing, and I wanted to point out to you the Chippewa River here. And upstream would be Lake Pepin. Here is the Knapp Stout headquarters at Reed's Landing. Here is the old school, or the site of the Wabasha County Historical Society. That building is still standing. And down here, this building is still there, the site of a bar-restaurant operation. At this time, I'd like to point out a couple of steamboats that are here in port. These are larger boats, so I presume these are Mississippi steamboats. This is a picture from 1878 at the mouth of the Chippewa River. And because of the huge amount of sand and sediment coming down the river, it would tend to accumulate in this area right by the Mississippi here where it joined. And so the federal government erected some structures to try to make a better channel in here. And you can see a little bit of them here on these sides. Also, here's a raft coming down, and sometimes it was so low, the water level, that it would get stuck, and it was a major task of getting the rafts off of the sandbars. Here's another picture from 1885, kind of showing the revetments or structure that the government built in here to make a better channel. And this natural process of the sediment coming into the Mississippi is still ongoing, because if you go down there, you'll see the big piles of sand that the Corps of Engineers has dredged out of the Mississippi to keep the channel open. Another picture of the Reed's Landing. Again, notice the size of the boats. Usually the bigger boats are Mississippi boats, the smaller ones are Chippewa River boats. And so we have here, looks like even actually 3 Chippewa River boats here: the Union, the Monitor, and the Pete Wilson. Again, I would like to point out the Knapp Stout headquarters building, and this is quite a operation here, because not only did it contain the headquarters for Knapp Stout, but it also had a grocery store, a pharmacy, a tavern, restaurant, telegraph office, and warehouse. Dead Lake, as I showed you earlier, below Durand and above Ella was a steamboat stop. We can see them right here. Durand, this is really a nice early picture showing the Ida Campbell. This is the old steam ferry that ran before the bridge was built. The Monitor in the back, and the Pete Wilson. This was all at Durand. Dunville is where Phil Shekel would come every day to pick up lumber rafts which were assembled in Menominee and floated down the Red Cedar River. Here's a couple of rafts waiting to go. In the background, you'll see the old store at Dunville. This was the lodging house, and this was the horse barn. Rumsey's Landing was a busy place from 1840 to 1871. Here you can see the steamer Chippewa is in port. It had many businesses. It could take care of any need in the area. It was a major exporting port for grain, which was raised in the neighboring areas around Rumsey's Landing. Here's the Ida Campbell at Eau Claire in 1870, just before the railroad came in. Here's this Chippewa at Eau Claire off of the Water Street Landing. And the East Side Levee at Gray Street was the port where the famous American Eagle Old Abe left for the Civil War. And they have a nice marker here. This is a real special picture of early Wabasha, and this is the boatyard where they manufactured, built steamboats and repaired them. Again, we have the Red Wing, this time on Lake Pepin, and again it looks like there's some passengers and some freight being hauled. Here is the Silas Wright at Reed's Landing. And please take note of this dock structure here. Because I mentioned earlier about a steamboat dock being found at 9 Mile Island, and this is it. This has been quite a few years ago now, but this was the structure that was found. Notice the wooden pegs used to put it together. My son and I documented this structure and sent it off to East Carolina University in North Carolina with all the information that we had, and they agreed that it was a steamboat dock. So we were pretty pleased about this. Steamboats burned a lot of wood for power producing steam, and so they had to keep track of expenses, and one of the expenses was buying wood. And anybody could start up a wood yard along the river, and there were different places that steamboats stopped. Here's one that's at Meridine, This one says Pete Wilson Horse Hay. There, let's see. Ed Ray had a wood yard. Here's another one. Here's another one at Meridine. I imagine they would stop at the mill there. Could get all kinds of it. 2 cords, $3 a cord, $6 at that stop. And then, of course, the dates. Let's see. Porter's, there we go, Porter's Mill, 1 cord, $1.50. I could not find a picture locally of a steamboat loading wood, but I did find this one from northern Minnesota, and all that had to do was get all your friends together and start loading it on. And here you can see they're passing the wood from one person to another. Steamboats had to be advertised by the owners, and I've got a couple of examples here. This is from 1866, and this is the steamer Pete Wilson. And at that time, Phil Shekel was the captain. Daily trips between Reed's Landing and Dunville. And here's another one, the Chippewa Valley and the Chippewa Falls daily line of steamers. It tells their itinerary. This is from 1862. This is the Ida Campbell, which was busy on the Chippewa River. And they said they could run during high and low water, lowest river rates. Here's another one for the steamer Albany. Went from Durand to Reed's Landing. It says and to Menominee via Dunville. The Knapp Stout Company had 17 rafting steamboats in their business. I'm going to show you some of their boats. This is the Bart Linehan, a stern wheeler. The Annie Gurdon, actually a side wheeler here. It says on the side, Lightning Packet of Menominee. The Helen Mar, this one's at Reed's Landing. The stern wheeler. The Louisville at Reed's Landing again, stern wheeler. Notice the KS Knapp Stout. Here's the Menominee on the Chippewa River pushing a lumber raft. And up on Red Cedar Lake, Knapp Stout had an extensive lumbering and logging operation, Rice Lake, Barron County area, and they had the Lewis Tainter steamboat running up on Red Cedar Lake. Here the Knapp Stout workers are probably unloading supplies. In the background you can see there's the steamboat in the background here. This is the Red Cedar River, and you can see the logs floating in here. Here is a pleasure craft propelled by a steam engine. You can see the stack in the back. I thought this was really interesting. This is for Henry E. Knapp, Menominee, Wisconsin, saying, with best wishes, respectfully, George C. Cyril. So I wonder what this is all about. And these are some paintings that Mr. Cyril did for the Knapp Stout Company. I think they're really attractive and looks like watercolors. Anyway, this is the Champion side wheeler. Here's the Champion down on the Mississippi in Illinois pushing a raft. Here's the Pete Wilson side wheeler. And here is a final one of the Pete Wilson. So you may ask, where did all of these rafting boats go when they went down to the Mississippi with all of their lumber rafts? Well, there were three main destinations. St. Louis, Missouri was the largest lumber yard. They also had two others, one in Fort Madison and Dubuque, Iowa. I mentioned Phil Shekel earlier, one of the most well-known captains and river pilots on the Chippewa. He worked from 1855 to 1900. Here is the steamboat named after him, actually. They called the Phil Shekel, and this was in 1880, taken at Reed's Landing. Here he's passing through Durand again, and you can see the swing bridge is open for him, and he's got his ever-present lumber raft. Here's the Phil at Dead Lake, and you can kind of get a good view of the size of the rafts that he would push to Reed's Landing every day. Here's the Phil on the Chippewa River. And this is an interesting picture because if you look at it closely, you can see that it's not just the Phil Shekel here. There is at least one or two more boats behind him. And you look at study it a little more, and you think to yourself, well, this kind of looks like a steamboat race. This is really an interesting picture. Wish I knew the story behind it. The anchor for the fill shekel is still in existence, and it is on display at Pappen, right on Highway 35, at their historical site where the depot is located. There is a plaque there which says Anchor from the Fill Shekel, a steamboat which was run on the Chippewa River for many years during the last half of the 19th century. Captain Shekel was perhaps the best known pilot that ever put his hand to a wheel of a Chippewa River steamboat. Ed Heerman was another successful steamboat operator on the Chippewa River. It's a picture of Ed. He was working there from 1863 to 1882, about 20 years. Here are three of his main boats: the Ida Campbell, the Iowa City, and the Mini Etta. Here is the Ida at Rumsey's Landing. In later years, there was a sawmill at Rumsey's Landing. You can see the logs laying here waiting. There are marks on the ends of the owners. Here's another picture of looks like some local people with a little log raft going down to the sawmill at Rumsey's Landing. Here's the Iowa City pushing a raft. The Shaw Lumber Company in Eau Claire had a boat also, the L.W. Barden. Well, there were a lot of hazards to navigation, needless to say. Low and high water. Of course, there were snags, logs, and ice. Probably the worst was fire and boiler explosions, which were very deadly. Storms could blow the boats around the rivers. Collisions. Here is an early newspaper article about the hazards of relying upon the Chippewa River and the steamboats. It says, barge sunk. We learn that a barge heavily laden with goods destined for Eau Claire was sunk in the Chippewa a few days since. The Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls merchants have had a hard time of it in endeavoring to get their goods forwarded this present season. All the merchandise they have received for some months past has been transported from Reed's Landing in wagons. Here is a list of some area lost steamboats. the Ida Campbell, the Skipper, the Johnny Schmoker in the Chippewa, the Jeanette Roberts, and the Elian, all met with some type of disaster. Here's a picture of the Lorena. I'm not sure where this is from, but apparently there's a fire going on here. This steamboat has had a major catastrophe. It appears like this is in the Mississippi River someplace. They say that its average steamboat has a lifespan of about 5 years. So it looks like this one has made its 5-year lifespan and been abandoned on the shore, stripped of its machinery. Well, the end of the steamboat era is upon us, and the major reason is because of the advent of the steam engine train. This was the death knell of the steamboat, because the trip from the Mississippi River to Eau Claire by steamboat was about 13 hours, and by steam train it was more like 3 hours. So you can see what a difference that would make. Plus it was more dependable also. This is about 1882 at Durand, probably when the first train came through. Quite an occasion to celebrate. Well, there was one last gasp of the steamboat on the Chippewa River, and this was in 1912. And the Red Wing came up the Chippewa to Durand on an excursion, and you can see the excursion barge is in front of the Red Wing, and all the people gathered around. It was quite an occasion. There had been about 12 years since a steamboat had come up the Chippewa. Here's a picture of this return trip of the Red Wing. There's Round Hill in the background. And Ed Heerman said it best. He says, as the canoes of our aborigines gave way to the keelboats of the early lumbermen, and they to the steamers of a few years later, so must the boats yield in turn to the steam cars. Well said, Ed. Well said. And I would like to thank my sources and credits for supplying me with information for my presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining me for my presentation today.